The world tilted wrong when consciousness arrived. I became aware first of restraint. Not chains, but something heavier. Weight. The inability to move my body with intention. My eyes opened to institutional white, the kind of sterile that makes your throat tight, and for a moment I couldn't place myself. Then it came. The smell of antiseptic layered over something burned. Metal. Char. My office had burned. I tried to sit up. My body disagreed. Whatever they'd given me moved through my veins like molasses, thick and suffocating. I lay there in the narrow hospital bed, counting ceiling tiles to steady my breathing. 1, 2, 3, 4. My right arm throbbed. Bandages wrapped around the forearm, white gauze stained with something the color of rust. The explosion happened at my desk. I remembered that much. Wednesday morning, 9:47 a.m. I remembered checking my watch before opening the file. It was supposed to be the final document for the cartel piece. 3 years of investigation. 3 years of dead ends and threats that started as whispers and became something louder. Then the file opened and the world went orange. But I was alive. That seemed wrong. I lay there in the darkness, listening to monitors beep their mechanical rhythm. My mouth tasted like chemicals and old blood. The IV in my left arm pulled every time I breathed. A dull ache that reminded me it was there. Outside the small window, Chicago sprawled out in the distance, unreachable. Rain slicked the glass. October rain, angry and cold. The door opened without warning. A nurse, maybe, except something felt off about the man who entered. He wore scrubs, but his eyes were flat. Professional. I'd spent enough time investigating organized crime to recognize the particular quality of emptiness that came from doing violence as a job. His gaze swept over me, not with concern, but with assessment. He checked my IV line, confirmed that I was conscious, and left without speaking. Fear started low in my stomach then. Not the sharp kind, but something creeping. Methodical. Another man appeared minutes later, different scrubs, same blank expression. He positioned himself just outside my door, visible through the window. Not a guard, exactly. Too casual for that. Just present. I understood then. The hospital wasn't refuge. It was a cage. My mind spiraled through possibilities, each worse than the last. The cartel had found me. They'd tried once before, 3 years ago when the first pieces ran. That time it had been a car pushed deliberately off a bridge. The driver got out. I didn't. Sophia's birthday cake was still on our kitchen counter when I went into the hospital that time, already stale at the edges. Sophia, the thought of my daughter sent ice through my chest. She was with her father, wasn't she? Thomas had her on Wednesday afternoons. That was the schedule. He'd pick her up from school at 3 p.m., and I'd have her back by Sunday at 6. Sophia loved going to her daddy's house because he let her order Thai food and let her fall asleep watching cartoons without argument. Normal father things. If the cartel knew to find me in my office, would they know to find her in school? No. I couldn't think like that. Thomas would have called. He would have said something was wrong. But my phone wasn't here. I looked around the room like it might materialize. Nothing. Just me and the machines keeping track of my still beating heart. My still breathing lungs. Standard hospital furniture. A plastic pitcher of water I couldn't reach. A remote attached to the bed rail. The clock on the wall read 3:14 a.m., Thursday morning then. That meant I'd been unconscious for nearly 18 hours. Someone had erased 18 hours of my life, and I had no way of knowing if my 7-year-old daughter was safe. The panic came fast and hot. I tried to get up again, fought the medication in my system, got my elbows under me. The monitor started screaming. My heart rate visible on the screen climbing toward numbers that couldn't be good. The man outside my door didn't come in. Didn't check on me. Just watched through the window. That was when I realized the monitors weren't there for my benefit. The panic needed somewhere to go. It needed a solution or it would consume me from the inside out. I forced myself to think like a reporter, not like a mother. Observation, strategy, survival. The machines could be appeased. I slowed my breathing. watched my heart rate descend on the screen. The man outside the window didn't react to my performance, which meant he wasn't watching the numbers. He was watching me. My personal items. There was a cabinet beside the bed, the kind that's standard issue. I could see the edge of it from here. Standard drawers. I waited until the man made his usual rotation, his gaze shifting to check the hallway. Then I moved. The medication made everything slow and stupid, but I managed to open the drawer. There, my wallet, my watch, and beneath everything else, my old agenda. Physical, paper, the kind I'd kept from my journalism days when everything important went into analog format. No one had bothered to take it. Too outdated, maybe. Too overlooked. Inside the front cover, in fading ink, was a phone number. Marcus had given it to me 3 years ago. Last resort, he'd said. Someone who can actually help if things go sideways. I'd asked why I needed a mob contact, and Marcus had laughed. He hadn't answered the question, though. Now, 3 years later, in a hospital room where the walls had eyes and the monitors had ears, I understood that Marcus had been preparing me for exactly this. I couldn't use the phone in my room. The wall-mounted device that connected to the hospital system would be monitored. But there had to be a way. There always was. People in hospitals needed to make calls. There was a payphone. I'd seen it down the hallway when they'd wheeled me in. Back when I was barely conscious. I had to move before shift change. Before the rotation of guards that surely existed. That kept me checked and contained. The IV came out cleaner than I expected. The site was already starting to bruise, the needle's penetration point ugly and red. I pressed the gauze they'd left on the bedside table against it and held pressure. 60 seconds. 90. The bleeding slowed. I couldn't use the hospital gown. I needed clothes. The cabinet yielded nothing. The bathroom yielded nothing. But the last time I'd been hospitalized, they'd kept personal items in a storage unit. I moved toward the door, my legs unstable, the world tilting sideways. Every nerve ending was screaming wrong, but the alternative was worse. The hallway was dimmer than the room. Night shift meant fewer people, which was both good and catastrophic. Good because I could move without immediately being stopped. Catastrophic because any movement I made would stand out. The payphone was around the corner, near the elevators. Stupid place to put one, like they wanted people to be tracked. But I wasn't making a call. I was buying myself time. I kept my head down, one hand against the wall like I was weak, which wasn't difficult. Every step felt like walking through water. The man who'd been outside my room didn't follow. He might not have even noticed me leave, or he was letting me prove how desperate I was. How far I'd go. The payphone accepted coins. My wallet had $43 cash. Enough. I fed in the quarters with shaking fingers, then dialed. My voice, when it came, sounded wrong. Fractured. The phone rang 3 times. Then a man answered, and there was no confusion. No. Who is this? Just the irritated tone of someone woken at 3 a.m. Yes? I couldn't identify myself. Not on a hospital line, even a payphone. I'm in Harbor Medical, room 412. I need help. There was a long pause. I could hear breathing on the other end. Steady and controlled. Who gave you this number? Someone who said I'd need it if things went sideways. My voice cracked. Things have gone very sideways. I don't know if my daughter is safe. I don't know if I'll still be alive tomorrow morning. Another pause. Longer this time. I watched the hallway, counting my heartbeats, aware that at any moment someone would notice a hospital patient standing at a payphone. I'm tracking your location, the man said finally. Stay on the line until someone arrives. Don't go back to your room. Don't answer any questions from hospital staff. Do you understand? Yes, I whispered. What's your name? Megan Richardson. The breathing on the other end changed. Sharp, focused. Get to the stairwell, he said. 3rd floor. You have approximately 6 minutes before I need you moving vertically. Can you do that? I could feel the medication wearing off now, adrenaline burning through it like acid. Yes. Then move. The line went dead. The stairwell smelled like bleach and yesterday's coffee. Patterns, not speed. Always that. I counted the steps by the echo. paused on the landings where the vents roared loud enough to swallow footsteps, and timed my breathing to the HVAC's pulse. Cameras were blind on the turns. Older buildings advertised their secrets if you let them talk. I kept my head down and my pockets empty except for the coin that bought me the call. One tool, one purpose. Anything more is a story you can't keep straight under pressure. By the lobby, the night guard was arguing with a delivery driver about a clipboard no one wanted to sign. That argument was my door. I walked through it. The payphone's dial tone had that faint copper buzz I remembered from airports. Analog, not routed through the hospital switchboard. Good. Less logging. I waited for the corridor tech to finish his round. The squeak of his cart told me his timing better than any clock, then stepped out when the hall fell quiet. I kept the gown, but I folded it under the stolen jacket so the silhouette read as visitor in trouble, not patient deserting a bed. The trick in hospitals is never speed. It's pattern. Move when no one expects movement, and stop when everyone expects motion. The stairwell was colder than the hallway. My bare feet stuck to the concrete steps, and I counted them without meaning to. 15 steps to the landing. A door that led nowhere I could use. Keep moving, I told myself. Down. Always down. The man's voice had been calm on the phone. Professional. The kind of calm that came from having handled worse situations than retrieving a half-dead woman from a hospital. I didn't know if I should be reassured or terrified. Probably both. Behind me, I heard shouting. Someone had noticed the empty room. The monitors would be screaming now, alerting staff that I'd disconnected myself. It wouldn't take long for them to realize I was gone. Only slightly longer for the men watching the exits to understand what had happened. My breathing came in ragged bursts. The medication still pulled at my limbs, making everything feel like I was moving through honey, but adrenaline was a powerful thing. It burned through the fog, sharpened my edges, reminded my body that survival mattered more than comfort. The basement door was propped open. I hadn't done that. Someone had. The basement smelled like cleaning chemicals and old pipes, the fluorescent lights harsh against the darkness that seemed to seep in from everywhere else. A figure materialized from the shadows, and my heart nearly stopped. He was large in the way that suggested gym time wasn't optional. Black suit despite the hour. Eyes that assessed me without judgment, just pure tactical calculation. He didn't speak, just reached out, and I flinched, but his hands only guided me toward a service exit. The cold hit me like a wall. Chicago October at 4 a.m. was not forgiving. Rain fell in that aggressive way that suggested it had been falling for days, and my hospital gown stuck to my skin immediately. I had no shoes, no jacket, no identification. Just the old agenda clutched against my ribs like it was worth something. The black SUV was waiting at the end of the alley, engine running. The man from the basement opened the passenger door, and I hesitated. This was the moment where I'd lose everything. Once I got in that vehicle, I was committing to something I didn't understand with someone I'd never met. Then I thought about Sophia, and I got in. The man didn't join me. The driver didn't turn around. He was older, maybe 50, with silver threading through dark hair, and the kind of posture that suggested he'd been sitting in cars like this for decades. He didn't ask questions, just pulled into the street and drove like he had every right to be there. The city passed in wet blurs. Downtown Chicago gave way to industrial areas, then neighborhoods I didn't recognize. My teeth chattered. Shock or cold, I couldn't tell. The driver reached back and tossed a jacket over the seat. I pulled it on. It smelled like leather and expensive cologne, and I wondered whose it was. Where are we going? My voice came out hoarse from disuse and fear. Somewhere safe, he said. That was all. We drove for what felt like hours but was probably 30 minutes. The SUV slowed, turned, and my eyes focused on the world outside the window for the first time since leaving the hospital. We were in a suburban area, houses set back from the road with careful landscaping that suggested money, but not desperation to display it. The kind of neighborhood where people didn't ask questions about their neighbors. The gate opened without anyone touching anything. Remote access, probably. We pulled into a circular driveway that fronted a house that was simultaneously beautiful and fortress-like. Clean lines, strategic lighting, windows that looked out on the street, but somehow suggested you couldn't look in. Men in dark clothing stood at the perimeter, positioned with the ease of people who'd been there for hours. The driver parked, but didn't get out. The back door opened, and the man from the basement appeared again, gesturing for me to follow. I was inside the house before I understood what was happening. The interior was exactly what the exterior had promised. Wealth without ostentation. Art on the walls that probably had investment portfolios. Furniture that whispered old money. Everything calculated to convey power through restraint rather than spectacle. Then he stepped into the room. He was taller than I'd expected. Broader. The kind of man who didn't need to take up extra space because his presence already dominated every square inch. Dark hair combed back from a high forehead. Eyes like storm clouds. The kind of brown that looked almost black. There was a scar on his clavicle, visible where his black shirt lay partially unbuttoned. Not fresh. Old. Carved into his body like a mark he'd earned long ago. Gabriel Montesani. I knew the name the way journalists know names they've researched but never met. 3 years of investigation into organized crime meant I'd encountered his name dozens of times. In financial records, in testimony that was later recanted, in the margins of things people didn't want to admit. I'd expected someone older, crueler. Instead, he was looking at me like I was a problem he was solving in real time. "You shouldn't be conscious," he said. His accent was subtle but present, the kind that suggested Italian was his first language, but he'd spent enough time in America to smooth out the edges. "The medication was wearing off," I managed. "That's not what I meant." He stepped closer. I didn't move. There was nowhere to move to. "You called my number knowing what I am. Knowing that accepting help from me means you're now entangled in something significantly more complicated than whatever the cartel is planning." I was desperate. Yes, that was clear. He wasn't unkind about it, which somehow made it worse. "Your daughter is Sophia, 7 years old. She was supposed to be with her father today, Thomas Wells. Ring any bells?" My stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" "Because when I received your call, I started making calls. The man I'm looking for doesn't go to ground without understanding why people are motivated to hide him. Your ex-husband received a visit this morning from individuals asking questions about your location. He panicked. He picked up your daughter from school 2 hours early. I couldn't breathe. Sophia was out there somewhere, scared because of me, because my work had finally caught up. Where is she? His home. He didn't run. He went to ground, locked the doors, and called the police. They told him someone would be by. They've been by before. There was no judgment in his tone. He's competent in the way civilians are competent. Enough to recognize danger, not enough to actually evade it. "You need to help her," I said. "You need to go get her now." "I will." He turned away, and I saw him press something in his ear, heard him speak in rapid Italian to someone on the other end. When he turned back, he was already dialing down whatever had flared through me as urgency. "But first, you need to understand what comes next. Your ex-husband can keep your daughter safe for exactly as long as it takes the cartel to decide that leverage is more valuable than revenge. I estimate that's 6 to 8 hours. My people are already mobilized. We'll have her before that window closes. But once she's here, she's here. You don't leave. She doesn't leave. Not until I say it's safe." "Okay," I said, because there was no other option. "That number you called," he continued. "It's compromised now. You had it because someone gave it to you thinking you might need it. That person exposed me. Not by name, but by existence. The cartel now knows I have journalist contacts. They'll assume you work for me. They'll assume everything you published in the last 3 years was research for my benefit. This actually works in our favor because it means if I'm protecting you makes strategic sense. So I'm what, collateral? You're a complication I'm managing." He said it like that wasn't an insult. "Your ex-husband is sending a vehicle. My people will be waiting. Your daughter will arrive here within the next 3 hours. What happens after that depends on how well you understand that cooperation is your only option." I understood. I understood perfectly. I'd traded one cage for another, but this cage had walls that kept threats out instead of in. That would have to be sufficient. Sophia arrived exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes later. Thomas didn't arrive with her. He dropped her at the gate with a man who clearly worked for Gabriel, and I watched from the window as my daughter stepped out of a sedan, clutching her backpack, her small face creased with confusion and fear. I was moving before I consciously decided to move, and Gabriel didn't stop me. She fell asleep with one shoe on, as if ready to leave again the moment the world turned. I sat on the floor beside the couch and watched the rhythm return to her shoulders. That small lift that meant the body had finally decided it could survive the night. I didn't touch her. I just listened to the house relearn our breathing and measured the distance between what I'd promised and what I could deliver by morning. Protection isn't a room. It's a sequence of decisions you don't get to regret. Sophia arrived exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes later. Thomas didn't come past the outer cameras. He stopped short on purpose, per instructions my handler relayed, so he wouldn't drag a tail onto the property. He transferred her to a man in Gabriel's employ at the curb, while the gate stayed closed. A quiet choreography built to keep everyone alive. She didn't let go of me for 3 hours. Sophia's breathing had finally evened out around dawn. She'd cried herself into exhaustion, her small body curled against mine on the bed that Gabriel had shown us to. The guest room was nicer than my apartment had been, which felt like salt in a wound I couldn't articulate. My 7-year-old was sleeping in better circumstances than I'd ever provided, and it was because we were trapped. The room had windows, but they didn't open. I'd checked. The lock was keypad controlled, and I didn't have the code. I lay there in the stillness, watching her sleep, trying to rebuild the part of myself that had fractured somewhere between the hospital and this house. Sophia's nightlight cast shadows across her face. The unicorn she always carried was tucked under her arm. Thomas had managed to grab it before Gabriel's people arrived. One small mercy in a list of horrors. The house was quiet in that particular way of enforced wealth. Nothing creaked, nothing breathed. Just the ambient hum of climate control and the distant sound of rain that hadn't stopped since we arrived. Around mid-morning, there was a knock. I tensed, but it was only a woman. Middle-aged, with the bearing of someone who'd been running a household for decades. She introduced herself as Rosa and said breakfast was ready. Sophia didn't want to leave the room. I had to carry her downstairs. The kitchen opened onto a dining space that looked out over the property. Men patrolled the grounds with the ease of routine. 3 different vehicles were parked in the circular drive. The woman who'd cleaned my hospital room had cleaned my life too, apparently. Gabriel was already at the table. He'd changed since I last saw him. The shirt was still black, still expensive, but now he had a phone pressed to his ear, and his expression had hardened into something that looked like calculation. He nodded at us, but kept talking in that rapid Italian I was starting to recognize as his native language when pressure mounted. Sophia climbed into a chair across from him, and I watched her take in the spread Rosa had prepared. Eggs, fresh fruit, pastries that looked handmade. The kind of breakfast my daughter had never seen except in her grandmother's kitchen. "Your mother mentioned you like Thai food," Gabriel said, ending his call. He was looking at Sophia with the kind of attention that suggested he was filing information away. "Can you have that here?" Sophia looked at me. I nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "Then we'll have Thai for lunch." He turned his gaze to me. There was something different in it now. "You heard conversations last night. Multiple ones. You've been processing." It wasn't a question. I didn't bother denying it. "Your colleague, Marcus Hale, was the one who provided my number to you 3 years ago. He did this without my knowledge or approval. That creates a problem because now your name is in my infrastructure. The cartel intercepted communications suggesting you had a handler. That handler would be me, according to their logic. I don't work for you," I said. "No, but they believe you do. More importantly, they believe your work investigating them 8 months ago wasn't independent journalism. They believe it was intelligence gathering on my behalf." He paused to drink coffee. "This is actually beneficial to both of us. If they think you're my asset, killing you becomes attacking me directly. It escalates the situation beyond a simple cleanup operation into a territorial dispute." Understanding crashed through me. "You're using me as a shield. I'm protecting you by making the mathematics of your death more complicated than your silence would be." "Yes." Sophia was watching this exchange with wide eyes. I reached over and squeezed her hand, trying to communicate that this was adult conversation. that she didn't need to be afraid of the words being spoken. "Marcus," I said. "Is he okay?" Gabriel's expression didn't change. "He's been relocated. New city, new identity. He doesn't work in journalism anymore. The cartel was thorough in investigating anyone connected to your research. I had to move him before they decided to use him as motivation." The relief was overwhelming. Marcus had been my only friend in that industry, the only person who'd understood why I couldn't let the story go, why the truth mattered more than my byline. Knowing he was alive, even if he was somewhere I couldn't reach him, was mercy. "What about my family?" Sophia asked suddenly. "Daddy, your father is safe," Gabriel said. He directed the response to her, not to me, which seemed deliberate. "He's being kept informed that you and your mother are secure. When this situation stabilizes, you'll have scheduled contact with him." Sophia accepted this with the pragmatism of children who don't yet understand that adults lie about the important things. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm I hadn't anticipated. Sophia and I were confined to the upper floors, though the confinement was soft. Rosa brought meals. The rooms were comfortable. There was a small library Sophia could access, a television, games. The keypad-locked door had changed to biometric, which meant I was inside the system now, recognized. When I asked about this, Gabriel simply said that running from security created suspicion. On the 4th morning, I heard raised voices from downstairs, not loud enough to catch words, but pitched in a way that suggested disagreement. I cracked the door to the hallway and listened. Gabriel's voice was ice. "I don't care what the analysts are saying. The cartel didn't develop access to hospital infrastructure overnight. That means someone on the inside facilitated the surveillance, which means the police department that took the call about Richardson has a problem." A second voice I didn't recognize. "Should we assume compromise?" "Assume nothing. Verify everything. And get me confirmation that Marcus Hale made contact with his sister. If the cartel is still tracking our relocations, we need to know." The conversation shifted after that, moving into technical details about routes and resources. I pressed myself against the wall, understanding for the first time the scale of what Gabriel's protection actually meant. He had people everywhere, in hospitals, in police departments, moving fugitives, running intelligence, and now Sophia and I were part of that apparatus. Gabriel appeared in the hallway just as I was moving back to the bedroom. He'd changed again. The black shirt had been replaced by one with rolled sleeves, and I could see the scar on his clavicle more clearly now. It was old, puckered, the kind of wound that had healed badly and stayed visible as a reminder. "Eavesdropping," he said, not an accusation, trying to understand what I'm trapped in. "You're not trapped. You're protected. There's a difference, though I understand it doesn't feel that way yet." He moved closer, and I didn't back away. "Your daughter is safe. You're breathing. The cartel doesn't know exactly where you are. Those are the operative facts. And in exchange? In exchange, you remain here until the situation changes. You don't leave. You don't contact anyone outside this house. You don't give any indication that you exist somewhere other than in whatever grave the cartel is currently trying to dig. How long is that? As long as it takes." He said it like forever was an acceptable answer. Like the two of us standing in a hallway in his fortress was a reasonable permanent arrangement. Maybe in his world, it was. Sophia called from the bedroom. I turned away from him without another word, but walking back to my daughter, I found myself wondering what kind of man Gabriel Montesani actually was beneath the titles and the violence. Someone who'd taken time to learn Sophia's food preferences. Someone who'd moved heaven and earth to protect a stranger, because her existence had become strategically important. Someone who was starting to feel less like a predator, and more like the only thing standing between my daughter and the people who wanted us dead. The days blur together in ways that shouldn't be possible. Monday becomes Thursday becomes Saturday, and I'm no longer tracking time by calendar so much as by the rhythm of Sophia's voice during lessons. Rosa brought in 3 tutors on Tuesday morning. Advanced placement material, apparently. Gabriel's idea. My 7-year-old was suddenly doing fractions with a woman who held a PhD in mathematics from Northwestern. I watch from the doorway while Sophia concentrates, her small hand gripping the pencil with the same intensity I used to grip interview recorders. She's intelligent in ways I didn't fully appreciate when we lived our normal life. In normal life, there was school and homework and the simple logistics of keeping her fed and clothed. Here, with nothing but time and silence and the absence of my own work, I see her more clearly. The library on the second floor becomes my refuge. Gabriel has thousands of books. Fiction and nonfiction, economics and philosophy. I find myself drawn to the biographies. Men who built empires. Men who destroyed them. The line between the two categories seems remarkably thin. On Wednesday evening, Rosa finds me reading about Chicago's history during Prohibition. "You have a call," she says. "In the study. Mr. Montesani has approved it." Marcus sounds different when he answers. Lighter. Like he's breathing air that doesn't carry weight. "Jesus, Meg, I was worried I'd never hear from you." His voice cracks slightly. "Are you safe?" "Relatively. Depending on how you define the term. I'm sitting in Gabriel's study now, surrounded by his things. Books on economics. Photographs of nothing in particular. No family pictures. No evidence of a life before this one. You're safe? New city, new name. New job that's aggressively legal and aggressively boring. I'm working at a marketing firm, can you believe that? Me? Advertising. I'm dying slowly. He laughs, but there's genuine relief underneath it. Are they treating you okay? The people there? They're treating me like an asset, which I suppose is better than treating me like a prisoner, though the distinction feels theoretical at this point. I lower my voice, even though there's no one to hear. How bad is it? What they found? Bad enough that I couldn't stay. Bad enough that they've been tracing every contact I had in journalism. They found references to interviews I conducted, sources I talked to. They were going to assume I gave them information about the cartel. Protection was the only move. Marcus pauses. Is that why you called that number? Because you knew? I didn't know. I suspected. Or maybe my subconscious knew. I don't trust my own mind anymore, Marcus. I'm not sure I ever did. He laughs again, and it's such a normal sound that I nearly cry. I miss you. I miss the work. I miss giving a shit about things that mattered. The work still matters. It just matters differently now. After we hang up, I sit in Gabriel's study for a long time. The rain has started again outside the windows, that relentless October rain that seems determined to wear away the world's edges. Rosa appears silently to tell me dinner is ready. Law enforcement isn't sentimental, he added, not unkindly. They're resource-constrained. A gang war that can be contained with intelligence is preferable to a body count they have to own. If the Bureau sees a territorial dispute trending toward RICO leverage, they watch, they document, and they step only where it buys them indictments. Nobody is going to threaten a witness they need. Not the Bureau, not the locals who like promotions. Sophia is already at the table. Gabriel joins us without explanation, and I've learned not to ask where he's been. Sophia shows him her math homework. She's accelerated through fractions and into early algebra. Gabriel studies the problems with genuine focus, and I realize he's not just being polite. He actually understands it. He sits with Sophia at the dining table for an hour, walking her through concepts, asking her questions that force her to think rather than just memorize. Later, after Sophia is asleep, I find him in his study, the same study where I just talked to Marcus. I know about the phone call, I say. I assume everything in this house is monitored. He doesn't deny it. I needed to confirm Marcus was secure. Your people work fast when motivated. He needed to be moved further than I initially anticipated. My people? I'm not part of your world, Gabriel. Aren't you? He looks up from whatever he was reading. You're in my house. Your daughter is eating at my table. You called my number when everything was falling apart. You're not part of my world yet, but that's becoming a semantic distinction rather than a factual one. That's not fair. No, it isn't. But it's accurate. He sets the book down. It's in Italian, the title incomprehensible to me. The cartel started moving against you because your investigation 8 months ago benefited my position. Specifically, it exposed their distribution network in ways that allowed me to consolidate territory they'd been using. This wasn't your intention, but from their perspective, it looks coordinated, which means they have to assume you're working for me, which means if they harm you, they're attacking me directly. So, I'm a shield. You're a complication I'm managing strategically. There's a difference. He stands, moves to the window. I have assets in 7 states. Operations that move money and materials and information in quantities that would horrify most people. I have men who would do things I haven't asked them to do yet because they believe it would benefit me. But all of that infrastructure exists in the cracks between law enforcement priorities. The moment the cartel tries to move against you directly, this becomes a territorial dispute. Suddenly, the FBI gets interested in ways they weren't before. Suddenly, it stops being a cleanup operation and becomes something that requires political consideration. You're saying they won't touch me because it would be bad for business. I'm saying they won't touch you because I've made the mathematics of your death more complicated than your silence, which pragmatically means you're safe as long as you remain in this house, and as long as the situation between us doesn't become adversarial. And if it does? He turns from the window. There's something different in his expression. Something that looks like genuine apology. Then you and Sophia become bargaining chips like any other asset. Which is why I need to know that you're not planning to run. I'm not planning to run. Where would I go? You've made it clear that the cartel is patient and resourceful. They found me in a hospital. They know where Thomas works. They're invested in making sure I understand what happens when I make their interests complicated. Yes, that's accurate. So, what do you want from me, Gabriel? I've done what you asked. I've stayed. I haven't contacted anyone except Marcus, and you monitored that. Sophia is safe. What else is there? He moves closer. Not threatening. Just closer. I want you to stop acting like this is temporary. I want you to stop measuring your life in days and start understanding it in terms of what comes next. And I want you to understand that having you here, having Sophia here, changes calculations I made a very long time ago about what I was willing to risk for something that wasn't empire, or money, or power. I don't respond. Can't respond. Because somewhere between the hospital and this study, between Sophia learning algebra and Rosa bringing meals, I've started to believe that maybe Gabriel Montesani isn't the worst thing that could happen to us. Maybe he's just the only thing that could happen to us given the circumstances. And maybe those are the same thing. The proposition comes on a Tuesday morning while I'm reviewing financial documents Gabriel has left accessible on his study desk. Deliberately accessible. A test, maybe. Or an invitation. Gabriel enters without knocking. He does that sometimes now, the boundary between his space and mine increasingly permeable. I've stopped asking him to announce himself. I need what you have, he says. No preamble. The research. Names, operations, structure. Everything from your investigation. I set down the document I was reading. No, I haven't finished explaining. Doesn't matter. The answer is no. That information connects back to Marcus, to sources who trusted me, to people who could be hurt if it surfaces. He sits across from me, and I notice he's favoring his left side slightly. Something happened last night. I heard him return around 3 a.m, heard raised voices in the hallway, then silence. When I asked Rosa about it, she simply said Mr. Montesani had business. The cartel needs to believe the information comes from someone they turned, Gabriel says. A deserter from their own ranks. Someone inside who realized which direction the wind was blowing. That still requires the information to exist in a format they can trace. Only if you want them to trace it. He leans forward. Your research is encrypted, compartmentalized. The sources you protected are protected through layers of misdirection. If this information gets released through channels that suggest internal betrayal, the cartel will spend months investigating their own people. They'll create paranoia inside their organization. And they'll believe you're already dead, already dealt with, already handled by whoever sold them out. I understand what he's offering. Not just protection, but erasure. Not just survival, but transformation into someone the cartel thinks is already gone. Why would you need me to agree? I ask. You could take the information, decrypt it, release it however you want. Because you're a journalist. You know how to protect sources in ways I don't. You understand the architecture of misdirection better than anyone I employ. And because if you're going to remain in this house, if Sophia is going to remain in this house, then you need to understand that you're not a prisoner. You're a partner. The word hangs between us like something physical. Partner, I repeat. In this specific operation. What comes after depends on how well you understand that your cooperation is worth more than your compliance. I think about Marcus in his new city with his new name. I think about the sources who gave me information, assuming I'd carry their secrets to my grave. I think about the journalists I knew who died, because they asked the wrong questions to the wrong people. I think about what safety means when the alternative is the constant knowledge that you and your daughter are targets. If I do this, I say, you protect Marcus completely. Any future threat, any trace, anything. He disappears so thoroughly that even you won't be able to find him. Agreed. And my sources. Everyone connected to the investigation goes into whatever protection protocol you use for people who matter to you. Already handled. 3 of them are in new cities. 2 never existed officially, so they can't be traced. 1 is dead, but he died of natural causes 6 months before your investigation started. There's no connection. Already handled. 3 of them are in new cities. 2 never existed officially, so they can't be traced. 1 is dead, but Gabriel. He died of natural causes 6 months before your investigation started. There's no connection. The casual way he says it, already handled, tells me he started planning this the moment I mentioned Marcus's involvement. And Thomas gets a communication. Something that tells him Sophia is safe and that we're safe. Not where we are, but enough that he stops panicking. That's already scheduled for tomorrow morning. A call from a secure number. He'll hear Sophia's voice. I've stopped being surprised by how thoroughly he operates, by how many contingencies he's already considered, by how little I actually know about the scope of his reach. One more thing, I say. I need to understand what comes after. After this operation. After the information is released and the cartel turns on itself. What happens to us? He stands and moves to the window. The same window where he stood the night he made the offer of partnership. Outside, November has arrived. The sky is that particular shade of gray that suggests more rain is inevitable. That depends on what you want, he says finally. You could leave. Take Sophia. I'll provide resources, new identities, enough money to disappear into whatever life you choose. You could go to school, finish your degree, start a career that doesn't involve investigating organized crime. Or you stay. You help me continue to manage threats. You use your understanding of criminal structure to help me anticipate problems, and you let me protect you and your daughter in ways that become increasingly difficult to separate from love. The honesty of it catches me off guard. Gabriel doesn't romanticize what he's offering. He's not promising some fantasy where a mafia boss becomes domesticated by a woman's presence. He's saying that protection and possession and affection are languages that speak the same dialect in his world. Sophia asks me about the operation while we're eating lunch. She's developed a way of perceiving things through the house's atmosphere, through the subtle shifts in how people move and interact. Is something happening? She asks carefully. Something that requires my help, I tell her. Something that will make things safer for us. For everyone. She nods and goes back to her sandwich. Will you be here at bedtime? I will. That's what matters to her. Not the specifics of danger or strategy or the machinery of underworld politics. Just whether her mother will be present when night falls. Thomas's voice comes through the phone line thin and uncertain. Sophia speaks to him first, her small voice describing her new tutors and the books she's been reading. I watch her talk to her father, watch the way her face arranges itself into normalcy for his benefit. Is she really okay? He asks when I take the phone. She's safe. That's what matters right now. When can I see her? Soon. When it's safe. He's working on making it safe. The pronoun hangs there, and I know Thomas understands what I'm not saying. That Gabriel Montesani has become the architecture of my daughter's safety. That we're living inside his infrastructure. That escape isn't possible, and maybe isn't even what I want anymore. I got a job offer, Thomas says suddenly. Downtown. Better money. I could move closer. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't know what else to do. Because I'm her father and I feel like I'm failing her. You're not failing her. You're keeping her father alive. That's everything right now. After we hang up, I find Gabriel in his study. I sit across from him and say, "I'll do it. The operation. I'll give you what you need." He nods like he never doubted it. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow. You'll work with my analysts. They'll help you construct the narrative. The information will be released through channels that suggest internal corruption within the cartel. By next week, they'll be investigating each other instead of looking for you. And then what? Then we see if you can live with what comes next." The analysts work out of a room I haven't seen before, 3 floors below the main living space. It smells like stale coffee, and the particular staleness that comes from people working through the night. Gabriel introduces them as technical specialists, which means they're the kind of people who can make information disappear into new shapes, new origins, new credibility structures. I spend 16 hours explaining my research. Names, operations, geographic footprints. The cartel's distribution network that I'd spent 3 years mapping through interviews and leaked documents and connections between seemingly unrelated arrests. The analysts listen without judgment, typing everything into systems that transform my knowledge into data they can sculpt. "We release this on a Wednesday," one of them says. Her name is Catherine, and she speaks with the precision of someone who's thought through exactly how information travels. Midweek reduces visibility spikes. We push it through anonymous channels that suggest someone from inside their organization, someone with access to these specific details, decided the cartel was going to implode anyway, and wanted to accelerate the timeline. How do you make it credible? I ask. Redundancy. We layer the release across different platforms: dark web, journalists with criminal sources, law enforcement channels that prefer to leak rather than prosecute. Within 2 hours, the information exists everywhere simultaneously. The cartel won't be able to trace it, because there won't be a single point of origin to trace. Gabriel watches from the corner of the room. He's been here most of the night. At some point around 3 a.m, he leaves to handle something operational. I don't ask what. I've learned that asking creates complications. By Thursday, the operation is ready. The information goes live at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon in November. I sit in Gabriel's study with Rosa bringing coffee I don't drink, refreshing news feeds that start publishing stories within minutes. Leaked documents reveal cartel operations in 7 states. Names, amounts, methods, everything I've documented, now transformed into an internal betrayal. By evening, the cartel is fracturing. Gabriel appears sometime after midnight, and I notice he's moving wrong. His left side favors inward slightly. The cut above his eye is fresh. Very fresh. What happened? I don't move from the desk where I've been reading updates. Operational, he says. Nothing critical. That's not an answer. He removes his shirt without asking permission. The wound on his ribs is deep enough to need stitches. The skin around it is already bruising purple and black, like flowers dying in time-lapse. There's blood drying on his clavicle, trailing from the scar I've become familiar with. I stand without thinking about it. There's a first aid kit in the study, something Gabriel apparently believes is necessary in a room designed for strategy and decision-making. The supplies are high-end, the kind of medical equipment that suggests he's been wounded enough times to plan for it. Sit, I say. He sits. I clean the wound with steady hands, surprised at my own composure. This is closer to nursing than anything I've done since hospital training. But the muscle memory remains. The way injury is just another problem requiring precise attention. The cartel contacted me through intermediaries, Gabriel says while I work. They wanted to negotiate the release, thought they could contain it if they moved quickly. My people explained that the information was already distributed too broadly to contain. So they attacked you. They sent representatives to discuss terms. The discussion escalated. I find a suture kit. My hands move through the motions, cleaning, preparing, stitching. The needle passes through his skin with small resistance. He doesn't flinch, doesn't even seem to notice. How many stitches? I ask. 12 should suffice. I count while I work. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The wound closes under my hands, and I realize I'm seeing something I wasn't supposed to see. Gabriel Montesani bled like anyone else. Violence had consequences for him, too. He wasn't some force of nature that existed above damage. Why did you let me do this? I ask, tying off the final stitch. Because you wanted to. I step back, and his eyes track me. There's something different in them now. Something that looks like recognition. You called because you needed me, Gabriel says. But also because part of you understood what I was. What I could do. What I could protect you from. I called because I was desperate. Yes. And desperation isn't the same thing as accident. You had my number because Marcus gave it to you specifically in case desperation arrived. You kept it because part of you believed you'd need it. He stands, moves closer. So the question isn't why you called. The question is why you're still here. Sophia's voice comes down the hallway. She's looking for me. Rosa brings her to the study, and my daughter takes in the scene without judgment. Gabriel shirtless, my hands stained with disinfectant, blood on white gauze. She processes this as simply a fact that requires no explanation. Mr. Gabriel got hurt, she states. Yes, but he's okay now. Sophia accepts this and asks if I'll come tuck her in. I do. Gabriel remains in the study, moving through the house like nothing happened. Like his body didn't require repair. Like intimacy hadn't just shifted into something neither of us has language for. Thomas calls the next morning. He's heard the news about the cartel fragmentation. He wants to know if it's safe now, if he can have Sophia for longer stretches, if there's a timeline for something resembling normal life. Not yet, I tell him, but soon. And you? Are you coming back to Chicago? To your old life? I think about this question for longer than I should. My apartment is probably gone. My career is certainly destroyed. My reputation as an investigative journalist is now permanently tied to organized crime in ways that make future employment unlikely. My old life doesn't exist. I don't think so, I say finally. What will you do? I don't know yet. Gabriel overhears this conversation. He doesn't comment on it, but that evening he leaves financial documentation on my desk. A bank account established in my name. A significant amount of money. Not criminal proceeds, at least not directly. Legitimate investments and consulting fees that suggest I've been working as a security analyst for a corporate firm. A new identity layered so carefully that it would take weeks to unravel. New documentation that makes my existence officially legal in ways that protect Sophia and create distance between my current life and whatever comes next. I don't thank him. The moment feels too large for gratitude. The call came at 3:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the house shifted into a different configuration of reality in the span of seconds. Gabriel took it in his study, voice controlled, expression calcifying into something that resembled ice meeting glass. I was in the library when I heard him moving through the hallway with that particular quality of urgency that meant things had fractured. When he found me, he didn't waste time with preamble. Sophia's school received a call from someone claiming to be Thomas. Requested early pickup. The school flagged it because the voice didn't match the recordings on file. The words took a moment to translate. My brain moved through them slowly, syllable by syllable, trying to construct meaning that made sense. Sophia. School. Someone. Wrong voice. Where is she? My voice came from somewhere very far away, from the throat of a woman who was learning that terror had different amplitudes. Still at school, still in the classroom. My people are already mobilized. He moved like controlled violence, waiting for authorization to exist. I followed him down 3 flights of stairs to the basement level, to the room that existed in dimensions I'd avoided confronting directly. The command center. That's what they called it when they thought I wasn't listening. 47 monitors would have been excessive. They had 16. 3 of them showed live feeds from cameras positioned around Sophia's school. 47 students in that building. 12 staff members. Everything normal until it wasn't. The black vehicles appeared at 3:19 p.m. at the rear entrance, and I watched them arrive with the casual confidence of people who'd planned this operation with certainty. 3 men emerged from the first vehicle, 2 from the second, all moving with the synchronized precision that suggested they'd rehearsed every angle of extraction. The job came wrapped in 3 layers of nothing. A voice that called itself a broker, a number that died after midnight, and an advance wired through a bank that never picked up the phone. Outsourcing buys deniability, not miracles. We were told, School perimeter, 30 seconds, no heroics. 30 seconds is a lie people in offices tell themselves. 30 seconds turns to 60 when the wind lifts the jacket and your sightline breaks on the far car. I don't believe in clean work. I believe in work that ends where it's supposed to end and leaves no one worth remembering. Contract players, Catherine said. 2 Russian shooters and a pair hired through a Yamaguchi-gumi intermediary. Outsourcing to muddy attribution. Gabriel nodded like this didn't change the fundamental mathematics of the situation. Like the fact that his enemy had called in reinforcement from the Japanese organized crime structure was simply another variable he'd already incorporated into contingency planning. How many teams do we have on site? Gabriel asked. 7, positioned at all exits. 2 inside the building posing as contractors. Extract Sophia before they reach her classroom. It happened in 17 minutes. Sophia was retrieved by 2 of Gabriel's operatives disguised as school administrators conducting a routine fire safety drill. She wasn't frightened, hadn't been told there was anything to fear. Just taken from her classroom and placed in a secure vehicle while the attempted kidnapping transformed into something far more consequential for the people who'd attempted it. The school's security system had recorded everything. Gabriel's people ensured that law enforcement found the footage showing what appeared to be a coordinated abduction attempt. 4 operatives were arrested outside the school grounds. 2 others disappeared in the chaos, though I didn't ask where they disappeared to or what happened once they stopped being operationally useful to Gabriel's people. Sophia arrived at the house while the operation was still concluding. I'd been watching the monitors, counting seconds, measuring time in units of danger receding. When I heard the vehicle pull into the gate, I was moving before conscious thought could interfere. She stepped out of the SUV with the innocent confusion of a 7-year-old who understood that something had changed, but couldn't quite comprehend the geometry of threat. I pulled her into my arms with the particular desperation of a mother who'd nearly lost everything in an afternoon. The force of it surprised us both. "Mommy, you're squishing me," Sophia said, her small voice muffled against my neck. "I know. I'm sorry." She didn't understand why I was crying. Children don't have the calculus for close calls, for the mathematics of odds and proximity and how easily survival tips into something else. She just accepted that the world had shifted slightly, that the parameters of her safety had been recalibrated by forces she couldn't identify. Rosa brought her milk and cookies while I held her on the couch. Gabriel emerged from somewhere deeper in the house and sat across from us, and I noticed the favor he extended to his left side. Something had happened during the operation. A confrontation. Gabriel didn't offer explanation, and I'd learned not to ask. By evening, Thomas was on the phone. Gabriel had called him first, explained what had transpired, informed him that his daughter was safe, and that he needed to understand the scope of what they were managing together. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. Thomas asked 3 questions. Gabriel answered each with precision. Thomas arrived at the house at 9 p.m. I'd never seen him in this place before. He moved through the entry like someone crossing into foreign territory. Gabriel met him in the study, and they talked behind closed doors for an hour. I listened from outside, not bothering to conceal it. The conversation was quiet, but carried weight. Gabriel's voice remained steady. Thomas's alternated between controlled and fractured. They emerged simultaneously, and something had shifted between them. Not friendship, but recognition. Pragmatic acknowledgement that they shared a priority that superseded their competing claims on my attention and my daughter's well-being. "I'm taking the job downtown," Thomas said to me. His face was arranged into the expression of a man who just accepted something irreversible. "The corporation offered me a position. Better money. I'll be in the city permanently." "Why are you doing this?" "Because she's my daughter." He looked at Sophia, asleep on the couch, her small body curled into itself like she was trying to occupy less space. "Because you're here with her. Because that man just explained to me that the only way Sophia survives all of this is if all of us understand what we're protecting her from." It was the most honest thing Thomas had said to me since we'd separated. He sat beside Sophia for 2 hours without speaking, just watching her sleep like he was memorizing something essential. Gabriel didn't emerge from his study until after midnight. I found him there reviewing footage from the school operation. He rewound and replayed the moment Sophia was extracted, watched it like he was looking for elements he'd missed on the first viewing. "She was never in danger," he said without looking up. "My people had her before the operatives reached the 2nd floor. I know. But she could have been. Yes, which is why this needs to end. I didn't ask what he meant. I already understood. The cartel wouldn't stop escalating. Each failed operation would inspire them to try something more violent, more desperate, more certain to succeed. They had resources and patience, and the particular motivation that came from believing themselves to be losing territory and respect. Gabriel turned to me finally. I'm going to move against them directly, not defensively. Offensively. I'm going to dismantle their Chicago infrastructure so thoroughly that they lose the ability to maintain operations here. How long will that take? 3 weeks. 4 at most. After that, the threat to you and Sophia becomes theoretical rather than operational. I nodded. Because I understood what he was actually saying. That he was willing to escalate a war to secure his perimeter. That my safety and my daughter's safety had become worth violence on a scale I hadn't previously witnessed. That something had transformed between us into a commitment that went beyond protection and entered the territory of possession. Sophia called me from the bedroom. Gabriel excused himself, and I went to her. Lying beside her in the darkness, feeling the small warmth of her body against mine. In the morning, she asked if we could stay here longer. I didn't answer. I already knew the answer was yes. And I wasn't certain how I felt about that knowledge. 3 weeks became 4. Gabriel moved against the cartel with the precision of someone dismantling an infrastructure he'd spent months mapping. I didn't witness the violence directly. I didn't need to. The news did that for me. Distribution centers were raided by federal agents acting on anonymous tips. Key operatives were arrested on charges that had been waiting for leverage to materialize. Financial accounts were frozen through channels that suggested governmental involvement. The cartel was collapsing from the inside out, and Gabriel was orchestrating the collapse through layers of deniability so complete that no one could prove he'd touched anything. By week 5, intermediaries contacted the house, formal representatives of the cartel requesting negotiation. Gabriel received them in his study while I listened from the hallway, a habit I'd developed and he'd stopped discouraging. The conversation was cordial in the way conversations become when both parties understand they're discussing terms of surrender. Gabriel offered them simple mathematics. Withdrawal of all interest in my death, and Sophia's death in exchange for non-aggression from his organization for 3 years. The cartel was too weakened to refuse. They were bleeding operatives, losing territory, watching their infrastructure collapse. They agreed. The call lasted 17 minutes. "It's over," Gabriel said when he found me in the library. "You're no longer a target. Neither is Sophia." I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something closer to vertigo. The threat that had been the gravitational center of my existence for weeks had simply ceased to exist. I was free to leave, free to take Sophia and disappear into whatever life awaited us outside these walls. "I'm staying," I said. Not a question. A statement. Gabriel nodded like he'd already known my answer. Thomas arrived the next morning to take Sophia for the weekend. She'd begun the routine of splitting her time between her father's apartment downtown and Gabriel's house. School had resumed at a public institution where security was maintained discreetly by Gabriel's people posing as maintenance staff. Sophia had adjusted with the resilience of children, transitioning between her father's normalcy and Gabriel's fortress with a pragmatism that suggested she understood more about survival than any 7-year-old should. "She wants to know if you're coming with us," Thomas said. He'd changed since those early days. The frantic worry had calcified into something more structured. He had a routine now, a role, the better-paying job. The understanding that he was part of something larger than custody disputes and child support negotiations. "Tell her I'll be here when she comes back." He nodded and took Sophia's hand. She'd stopped calling Gabriel Mr. Gabriel weeks ago. Now it was just Gabriel, the same way she called her father Thomas when we were alone, and Dad when she was performing their relationship for outside observers. Children learn quickly which truths are safe and which must be hidden. Marcus contacted me through secure channels that Gabriel's people had established. He'd been living in Denver under a different name, working at a different newspaper, rebuilding a career that had been destroyed by proximity to my investigation. The cartel had stopped looking for him once they accepted that he was already gone. He'd started publishing again under a pseudonym, small stories. building credibility for a return to mainstream journalism that would come once enough time had passed to make him safe. "I heard it's over," he said when we video called. His face on the screen looked healthier than it had in years, less haunted. "I heard you're staying." "I'm staying." "With him?" "With Sophia. That's the primary arrangement. Gabriel is secondary to that calculation." But we both knew I was being dishonest. Gabriel had become integral to the architecture of my daughter's safety. The distinction between loving someone and needing them to survive had blurred so completely that separation wasn't possible anymore. I began working as a security consultant. Gabriel established the business through legitimate channels. I advised corporations on how to identify and prevent infiltration by criminal organizations. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using my expertise in investigating organized crime to help legitimate businesses defend themselves against it. Gabriel found this amusing. He didn't comment on it, but I caught him smiling once when reviewing my first client report. The library became my office. I set up systems there, secure communication channels, documentation that would withstand scrutiny. I was building a professional identity that was separate from Gabriel, but existed within the infrastructure he'd created. It was a balance I was learning to maintain. 9 months after the truce was negotiated, I watched Sophia turn 8 years old. Thomas brought her for breakfast, and Gabriel had arranged for someone to make her favorite cake. She opened presents from all 3 of us, her father, her mother, and the man who'd become something between an uncle and a stepfather, without anyone explicitly naming the relationship. Sophia was thriving. School was easy for her. She'd made friends. She participated in after-school programs that Gabriel's people vetted discreetly. Her life had become so normal that it required active effort to remember it had ever been otherwise. I looked at my daughter and understood that I'd stopped measuring safety in days and started measuring it in years, in the accumulation of ordinary moments, in the fact that she'd never remember the hospital or the car ride or the months when threats existed as a constant background frequency. "You're thinking loudly," Gabriel said. He was smoking on the balcony, something he did less frequently now. The violence had diminished over the months as his position solidified. He was no longer fighting for territory. He was maintaining it. "I'm thinking about what comes next." "That depends on what you want." "I want Sophia to have a real life. I want Thomas to be able to see her without fear. I want Marcus to publish the stories he's been writing. I want you to stop being a criminal." Gabriel laughed, not unkindly. "I'll give you 3 of those 4. The last one isn't possible. I'm too far into this structure to extract myself, but I can stop wanting to escalate. I can stop seeking new territory. I can be content with what I have." Is that contentment or resignation? Probably both. Sophia called us for cake. We went inside, and I watched my daughter surrounded by the men who loved her in different languages. Thomas spoke to her in the voice of a father claiming his biological right. Gabriel watched her with the intensity of someone who'd chosen to protect, rather than possess. And I existed between them, no longer a prisoner or an asset, but something closer to an anchor. A person who'd made the choice to stay rather than escape, and was learning to live with the complexity of that decision. The rain had stopped falling. October had become, November had become spring. And the world outside the windows suggested that seasons continued their rotation, regardless of the wars fought within human parameters. Sophia blew out her candles and made a wish she wouldn't share. When I asked what she'd wished for, she said she'd wished for everything to stay exactly as it was. I didn't tell her that wishes don't work that way, that time demands change, and nothing remains static forever. Instead, I held her close and promised that however the world shifted, all of us would shift with it. All 3 of the adults who'd become central to her existence would continue to circle back to her, regardless of the complexities that bound us together. Gabriel caught my eye across the table, and something passed between us. Recognition, perhaps. Or acceptance. We'd both chosen something we hadn't anticipated when that first phone call connected us in the darkness. We'd chosen obligation transformed into something resembling love. We'd chosen the complicated geometry of a family constructed from crisis, rather than comfort. It wasn't redemption. None of us were redeemed, but it was survival, and sometimes that's enough.